I went to the cabin because I needed isolation after quitting my night warehouse job. My sleep was wrecked, my nerves felt thin, and I wanted days without noise or people. Late October felt right, cold enough to keep bugs away, quiet enough to think. The listing was plain. One photo of a small cabin. Cash only. No reviews. No address. The owner sent coordinates by email after I paid. That should have stopped me, but I wanted to disappear for a week. The drive north took most of the day. Highways thinned into two-lane roads, then into gravel. Trees closed in. The sky stayed low and gray. The coordinates led me off a forest road onto a rutted track barely wide enough for my car. Branches scraped the sides. The air smelled wet and old. I followed the GPS until it told me to stop. There was no sign, no mailbox, no marker. Just trees and a small clearing. The cabin sat back from the track, crooked, roof sagging at one corner. It looked older than the photos. The wood was darker, soaked from years of rain. A generator sat chained to a pine, fuel can beside it. No cell signal. The quiet pressed hard, the kind that makes small sounds feel loud. I unlocked the door with the key left under a loose stone and stepped inside. It was one room, a bed against one wall, a small table, shelves with mismatched dishes, a propane heater bolted near the center. The smell was damp wood and old smoke. The floorboards were rough and uneven. That was when I noticed the boot prints. They were dried into the dirt on the floor, leading from the door straight to the back wall. Large prints, wider than my boots. The tread was deep, sharp at the edges, not worn. I stood there and compared them to my feet. They did not match. I told myself the owner had been there recently. Maybe they forgot to clean. I did not wipe them away. I should have. I unpacked while daylight faded. I tested the generator. Started clean and steady. The heater worked. I checked the windows. One faced the woods, another faced the track. Both had simple latches. No curtains. I felt exposed but tried to ignore it. I cooked canned food and ate standing up. The woods darkened early. Sounds traveled far. A branch snapping sounded close even when it wasn't. I locked the door before bed. I left the generator running for heat and light. The first night passed without trouble. I slept hard and woke late. The morning felt empty and still. No footprints outside besides my own. I walked the area. There were no other buildings. No fresh tire tracks besides mine. The cabin felt cut off in a way that was both calming and wrong. I spent the day reading and resting. By evening, the sky cleared. Stars came out sharp and cold. The second night was colder. I filled the generator again before dark. I locked the door and checked the latches twice. The heater ticked and hissed. The light hummed. I fell asleep under heavy blankets. I woke up in the dark. The silence felt wrong. The steady hum was gone. The light was out. The heater was cold. For a moment I thought the fuel had run dry, but I knew I had filled it. My phone said 2:40 a.m. No signal. The air felt different, like something had shifted. I lay still and listened. The woods were not quiet in a normal way. There was no wind, no distant movement, just a flat absence of sound. I got out of bed slowly. The floor was cold under my feet. I did not turn on my flashlight right away. I stood there and breathed, waiting for any sound that would explain the silence. Nothing came. I moved to the window that faced the track and lifted the phone light just enough to see outside. The generator sat dark. The chain still held it to the tree. The fuel can was upright. I stepped closer to the glass and saw the ground near my tires. The gravel was disturbed, not scattered like from driving, pressed down in one area, as if someone had crouched there. The marks were fresh. The edges were sharp. My chest tightened. I checked the other window. The woods were black and dense. No movement, no light. I did not open the door. I backed away and locked it again even though it already was. I turned on the flashlight fully and swept the room. The boot prints on the floor looked darker in the beam. I had not noticed how deep they were. They led to the back wall and stopped. There was nothing there, just wood. I waited until morning without sleeping. When light finally came, I went outside. The generator had been shut off clean. The The switch was flipped. The fuel line was intact. There was no sign of damage. The chain had not been touched. I circled my car. The crouched area near the tires stood out in daylight. There were faint boot marks leading away into the trees, spaced wide, heavy steps. They did not follow a trail. They cut straight through brush. I packed fast. I did not eat. I did not clean. I loaded the car and left the cabin locked. On the way out, my GPS lost the signal twice. When I reached the main forest road, my phone picked up a weak signal. I pulled over and checked the coordinates again. I compared them to a property map. The location did not line up with any registered cabin or parcel. It sat in a gap between listings, land owned by the county. I drove straight to the nearest town. I went to a public place and used the Wi-Fi. I searched the classified site. The listing was gone. The email address bounced back. I reported what happened to local authorities, explaining the unregistered location, the boot prints, the generator being shut off, the disturbed gravel. They took notes. Days later, I learned what they found. The cabin had been used off and on by illegal hunters and squatters. The person who rented it out did not own it. They had copied old photos from a different listing years earlier. Someone had been staying there recently, living nearby in the woods, using the cabin when it was empty. The night I was there, that person returned, saw my car and waited. They shut off the generator to force me outside or to see if I would react. They crouched near my tires to check if I was awake, maybe to count how many people were inside. They left when I did not open the door. The boot prints were theirs. The reason they ended at the back wall was because there was a loose panel behind a shelf, a small storage space cut into the wall that led to an old crawl gap. It was hidden well enough that I never noticed. The person had been inside the cabin before I arrived and had left through that gap when they heard my car. I never went back for my money. I quit trying to disappear after that. The isolation I wanted was real, but the danger was too. What stayed with me was how quiet it all was, how easy it was for someone to be that close without making a sound, and how simple it would have been for me to step outside at 2:40 a.m. and not come back. This happened in November 2015 in eastern Kentucky, not far from reclaimed coal land where the hills looked smooth but wrong, like they were pressed down by a giant hand. My brother owned a small hunting cabin there. He let me use it for a weekend after deer season ended. I brought a coworker because neither of us wanted to be alone that far out. The cabin had been empty for weeks. No one was supposed to be around. The drive-in was quiet and long. The last paved road ended miles before the cabin. We followed a dirt path that dipped and climbed through thin woods and patches of open ground where nothing tall would grow. Old coal scars showed through the soil in places. The land felt unfinished. The cabin sat in a bowl-shaped clearing, lower than the surrounding tree line, like something had scooped the earth out. No other buildings, no trails cut through the brush. Felt hidden but not protected. The cabin itself was simple. Log walls, metal roof, 2 small windows, a front door that stuck unless you lifted it just right. Inside was one room with bunks, a table, a propane heater, and shelves with old gear. Smelled like dust, wood, and cold air. The quiet pressed in once we shut the door. Sound did not travel far there. Felt swallowed. Before dark, we walked the perimeter to make sure nothing was wrong. That was when we saw the scratches. They ran along several of the outer logs, deep and uneven. Long lines, some straight, some curved, crossing over each other. They looked fresh. Pale wood showed through the darker surface. They did not look like claw marks. They were too deliberate. Some lines were shallow, others dug in hard, like something heavy had been dragged across the logs more than once. I ran my fingers near one of the marks and felt how rough it was. Caught my skin. I tried to think of an animal that could do that, but nothing fit cleanly. Bears leave different damage. Deer do not scrape wood like that. It looked more like metal had been pulled along the wall. I told myself it could be old damage I never noticed before. I wanted that to be true. We locked the door after dark. The bowl-shaped clearing filled with shadow early. The trees blocked the moon. The woods felt close, like they leaned inward. We cooked simple food and ate without talking much. The heater clicked and popped. Outside, nothing moved that we could hear. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up because the air felt wrong. The heater was still running, but the cabin felt colder. Then I heard movement. Not fast, not random. Heavy steps pressed into the ground close to the walls. Whatever it was did not circle the cabin like an animal testing a boundary. It moved with purpose. It stopped at the corners, paused at each window. The floor creaked under my weight as I shifted on the bunk. I held still after that. The steps stopped near the sidewall. I could hear breathing, slow and controlled. The sound came through the logs, low and close. Then the smell hit. It crept in through the gaps in the wood and the doorframe. Wet and coppery, like rust mixed with raw meat. It was thick enough to taste. The steps moved again. They stopped near the window closest to me. The thin curtain shifted slightly. A shadow pressed against it. Not an animal shape. Too tall, too straight. The outline was uneven at the shoulders, wider than it should have been. It stayed there long enough for me to understand that whatever stood outside was upright, leaning in, testing the wall with its weight. The wall gave a faint groan under pressure. Not breaking, just responding. The smell grew stronger. I focused on breathing quietly, keeping my body still. The shadow pulled back. The steps moved to the next corner. The same pause, the same pressure, the same smell. This went on for a long time. No rushing, no panic, just slow movement, checking each side of the cabin like it was being measured. At one point, something scraped along the outer wall. The sound matched the marks we had seen earlier. Long, dragging, uneven, metal on wood. Eventually, the steps moved away. Not into the woods, but down the slope of the clearing toward the lowest point. The smell faded last. I did not sleep again. Morning came pale and cold. Fog sat low in the bowl. We went outside as soon as there was enough light to see. The ground around the cabin was soft with mud. Prints marked the earth near every wall. They were not deer tracks. They were wide with clear heel marks. Boot prints. Large ones. The tread was worn unevenly, like the boots were old and carried weight wrong. The prints moved from wall to wall, stopping at each corner. They did not wander. They did not overlap much. Whoever made them knew where they were going. Near the window, the mud was pressed down deeper, like someone had stood there for a while. Near the scratches, the ground showed signs of dragging. Long lines cut through the mud that matched the height and angle of the marks on the logs. We followed the prints downhill. They led toward a stand of trees near the edge of the clearing, then disappeared into harder ground where the soil turned rocky and bare. There were no signs of an animal carcass nearby, but the smell lingered faintly in the air, carried on damp leaves. We packed up and left early. I did not want to spend another night there. On the drive out, the land looked different. The smooth hills felt hollow. The open ground felt watched. Later that week, I went back alone in daylight with my brother. We searched the area more carefully. Downhill from the cabin, hidden by brush, we found a crude shelter built into a shallow cut in the earth left from old mining work. Tarps, rotting boards, and rusted metal sheets formed a low roof. Inside were old food cans, stained clothing, and deer bones piled in one corner. A metal tool lay near the entrance, its edge nicked and worn. Dried blood darkened the ground. The scratches on the cabin matched the height of that tool when dragged by someone standing close. The smell came from fresh meat being handled nearby. The prints matched the boots we found abandoned near the shelter, heavy work boots worn down from long use. Someone had been living there, using the cabin when it was empty, processing deer illegally after the season ended, storing meat, keeping watch. That person had come back that night, expecting an empty cabin. Instead, they found lights and sound. They did not want to be seen. They did not want to leave. They tested the walls, checked the windows, waited to see if anyone would come out. When no one did, they backed off and disappeared into land they knew well. My brother reported it. The shelter was cleared out. The cabin was locked tighter after that. I never went back to stay. What stayed with me was not the fear of an animal or something unknown. It was the certainty that someone was close enough to smell, close enough to press against the wall, patient enough to wait, and familiar enough with that land to move through it without being heard. I rented the cabin in late March 2020, somewhere in the Canadian Rockies, because everything felt like it was about to close in. Work was slowing. News was tightening by the hour. I wanted space before lockdowns fully hit, somewhere cold and quiet where time still moved at its own pace. The listing was basic. A single cabin, no neighbors, snow access only. I took it without thinking too hard. The drive climbed steadily, highways thinning into plowed roads, then into packed snow lanes cut between trees. The last stretch required chains. When I reached the place, the first thing that felt wrong was the orientation. The front door faced straight into dense forest. No view, no clearing, no path worn down by boots. Just trees packed close, trunks dark and tall, branches low enough to block light even in midday. The open space sat behind the cabin instead, like the structure had been turned away from the land on purpose. I stood there with the engine running longer than needed, listening to the quiet settle. Wind moved high above but did not reach the ground. Snow muffled everything else. The cabin itself was solid, old but maintained. Thick logs, low roofline. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I noticed the windows right away. Each one had metal brackets mounted into the frames. Not bars, not security grates. Reinforcement supports angled inward, like something had pushed against the glass before and someone decided it needed help holding. The air inside was cold but clean. No dust, no smell of long vacancy. A wood stove sat near the center. A table, a narrow bed, shelves stocked with basics. The place felt ready, like it expected someone. I unpacked before dark and walked the perimeter while there was still light. Around the back, the ground opened into a wide snow-covered clearing sloping down toward a frozen creek. Tracks crossed it in places. Deer, elk, small animals. Around the front, near the forest, the snow was smoother, wind-packed, harder to read. No obvious trail leading to the door. That bothered me more than it should have. The first night passed quietly until around 3 in the morning. I woke without knowing why. The stove had burned low, leaving the cabin cold and still. Then I felt it. A slow pressure against the wall, like something large brushing past. The logs creaked. Snow slid from the roof in a soft spill. I held my breath and listened. There was breathing. Not fast, not loud. Wet and steady, close enough that it seemed to come from all around the cabin at once. Whatever it was moved along the wall, brushing the structure as it passed. The roofline shuddered slightly, as if something tall had leaned or rubbed against the eaves. It did not touch the door. It did not test the windows. It simply moved past, slow and patient, then faded into the forest. I stayed awake until morning, replaying the sound in my head, trying to place it. The next day, I went outside early. Fresh tracks marked the snow near the front of the cabin. Large impressions, deep and wide, spaced far apart. They came out of the trees, approached the wall, followed the cabin's length, then stopped. Beyond that point, the snow was untouched. No exit trail, nothing leading away. I followed the edge of the treeline, circling wide, but the tracks simply ended. The wind had not filled them yet. They were fresh. I told myself it was elk. A large bull, maybe restless at the edge of winter, using the cabin as a rubbing post. The breathing could fit. The height too. The reinforced windows started to make sense. Wildlife damage, not security. That explanation held until the second night. Again, just after 3, the cabin shuddered. This time, the contact was closer, heavier. The wall flexed inward a fraction before settling back. Snow slid again. The breathing came with it, slow and controlled, almost thoughtful. The sound stayed longer this time, lingering near the corner by the front door, but never touching it. I stayed still. When I shifted on the bed, the movement paused. When I froze, it resumed. That detail lodged deep and refused to let go. By morning, new tracks layered over the old ones. Same pattern, from trees to wall, along the cabin, then nothing. I spent the day watching the clearing, scanning the forest edge with binoculars I found on the shelf. Nothing moved. No birds, no distant shapes. The forest felt thick and watchful, the way it does when animals know something larger is near. The third night was colder. The stove burned low again. When the sound came, it was stronger. The roofline shook enough to rattle a shelf. I heard something brush the metal supports on the window, a dull scrape that made my stomach tighten. Still, the glass held. The breathing was closer than before. I could feel vibration through the floor. Whatever was outside stayed longer, moving back and forth along the wall. Slow passes like measuring. When it finally left, it did so the same way as before. No rush, no stumble, just a quiet retreat into trees that swallowed Saond whole. The next morning, I followed the tracks again, wider this time, deeper. At the point where they ended, I noticed something I had missed before. The snow there was not untouched. It was compressed in a broad area, as if something very heavy had stood still for a long time, then lifted straight up or shifted sideways without stepping away. That afternoon, I found old notes in a drawer, maintenance logs left by previous caretakers. One entry mentioned reinforced windows due to repeated wildlife contact. Another noted orientation chosen to reduce wind load and to keep animals from approaching the door directly from the clearing. The final entry was short. Late winter bull moose frequent area. Extremely large. Aggressive during seasonal stress. Avoid night exposure. The pieces fit into place slowly and all at once. A bull moose at the tail end of winter, tall enough that its shoulders reached the roofline, antlers brushing eaves as it moved. The breathing, wet and heavy. The slow pace, the rubbing against the walls, drawn by scent, heat, or habit. The tracks that seemed to vanish because the animal turned and followed its own path back, stepping carefully into wind-hardened snow that did not hold an impression. The pauses when I moved were coincidence layered with fear. A massive animal stopping to adjust weight, to listen, to decide. On the fourth night, it did not come. Wind picked up after sunset. Snow fell light and steady, erasing old signs. In the morning, the clearing was blank. I left that day. On the drive down, I passed fresh moose tracks crossing the road, leading from forest to forest, tall prints spaced far apart, unhurried. The cabin had not been built to watch the land. It had been built to turn its back on it, reinforced and angled to endure something that came close in the dark, night after night, not out of malice, but because the mountains belonged to it long before anyone needed a break from the world. I cleaned cabins seasonally for a property management company. It was steady work, quiet, and paid better than most jobs I had that did not involve people. In May 2021, during shoulder season before tourists returned, I was sent to a lake property in upstate New York. The access road ended early that year because spring runoff had washed part of it out. The last mile had to be done on foot. I parked, loaded supplies into a pack, and followed a narrow path through wet woods. The lake came into view first, flat and gray, still cold from winter. The cabin sat back from the water, tucked between trees. It was small, one level, with a low roof and a crawl space above the ceiling. The owner had warned me that people sometimes broke in during winter. It was not said like a big problem, just a fact. I had heard it before. Remote places attract quiet trespassers. The door was locked when I arrived. No signs of forced entry. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The air felt warm, not stale. That was the first thing that stood out. Winter cabins usually smell shut in. This one did not. The floors were clean. The table was clear. The bed was made tight, corners tucked. Dishes sat in the cabinets, clean and dry. No dust lined the shelves. It looked untouched, but not abandoned. I went to the kitchen trash to empty it. Inside were food wrappers and peels that were not old. No mold, no smell. The bag was tied off neat. I felt a small pull of unease, but told myself someone might have stopped by recently. Maybe the owner. Then I noticed the windows. There was condensation on the inside glass, faint but fresh. It should not have been there. The cabin had been locked for months. I started cleaning anyway. Habit kept me moving. I wiped surfaces that did not need it. I checked corners and under furniture. Everything stayed quiet except for the woods outside and the soft sounds of my work. The feeling did not go away. It sat low like pressure. I was wiping the counter when I heard it. A slow sound above me, not a scurry or scratch. A careful step, then another. The ceiling crawlspace ran the length of the cabin. The sound moved with intent. Whoever was up there knew how to place weight to avoid noise. But the joist still answered. I froze. The sound stopped. I waited. After a long pause, it started again, matching my stillness. When I shifted my foot, it paused. When I moved my arm, it paused. Felt like a test. I backed toward the bathroom without rushing. The steps followed, keeping distance. I closed the bathroom door and locked it. The room was small. No window. I sat on the floor and waited. I focused on my breathing. I did not move. Above me, the steps slowed, then stopped. The silence was thick. Minutes passed. I checked my phone. No signal. I stayed there until my legs cramped. When I shifted, the sound came back, soft and measured. I stayed still again. The sound stopped. That told me everything. This was not an animal. It was someone listening. After a long time, the sound moved away toward the far end of the cabin. I waited longer, then unlocked the door and stepped out. The cabin felt wrong now, like it was holding its breath. I did not call out. I did not announce myself. I went straight to the ladder that led to the attic hatch. The hatch sat flush with the ceiling, but one corner was off by a finger width. I pulled it down slowly. Cold air spilled out. The space above was narrow, filled with insulation. No droppings, no nesting signs. Tucked behind the insulation, rolled tight, was a sleeping bag. It was dark and worn. Nearby sat a small pack with empty bottles and food wrappers like the ones in the trash. The person was not there anymore. I did not search further. I closed the hatch and left the cabin. I did not finish cleaning. I hiked out fast, listening behind me the whole way. The woods stayed quiet. I reported everything to the company and the owner. Later, I learned what happened. During winter, someone had been staying there, using the crawl space to avoid detection. They left when the weather warmed, but came back when they heard someone arrive, hoping to stay hidden until I left. They tracked my movement by sound, stopping when I stopped. When I locked myself in the bathroom, they stayed still, then used the far end of the crawl space to exit through a vent that led outside near the back wall. The owner sealed the vents and added cameras. The cabin was cleaned again by a different crew. I was offered other jobs. I kept working, but I stopped taking remote cabins alone. What stayed with me was not fear in the moment. It was the calm of the footsteps, the way they stopped when I did, the proof that someone was close enough to hear my breath and patient enough to wait for hours without being seen. I stayed in an old fire lookout cabin in September 2012 as a volunteer, helping with seasonal maintenance before winter shut the place down. It was in Central Oregon, high enough that the road up was rough and slow, and the last stretch had to be walked. The cabin sat on a rocky rise, trees thinning out as elevation climbed. From the outside it looked sturdy, but everything about it was old. No electricity, no running water, a propane stove and a small heater, a radio that only worked when it wanted to. I arrived with a pack full of tools, food, and notebooks. The forest was active during the day. Birds moved through the trees. Wind shifted the tops of the pines. Insects hummed in the brush. Felt normal. I unlocked the cabin, climbed the stairs, and went inside. The interior was spare. A narrow bed, a desk bolted to the floor, shelves with old maps, and windows on every side. The ladder and stairs that led up were exposed, bolted to the rock below. Every sound traveled. The first evening, just after sunset, the forest went quiet. It was sudden, not a gradual fade. One moment there were insects, then there were none. No wind, no distant bird calls. The silence pressed in so hard it made my ears ring. I stood at the window and listened. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just the way sound carried at elevation, or a shift in temperature. I had read about it before. That night I slept lightly. The cabin creaked as wood cooled. Around the same time the silence returned, I heard something else. Footsteps on the stairs below the cabin. Slow, measured. but there was no weight shift, no creaking of metal, no strange sound from bolts or wood, just the placement of steps. I moved to the window and looked down. The stairs were empty. The ground below showed nothing moving. I scanned the trees. In the distance, between trunks, something tall passed through a darker patch of forest. It moved smoothly, upright, never breaking into a clear shape. It did not stumble or pause. It did not move like an animal on four legs. It did not move like a person hiking either. It was too even, too controlled. I stayed at the window until the silence broke hours later, when insects slowly returned. I slept after that. In the morning, I went down to check the stairs. The ladder rungs had new marks. Deep, narrow gouges in the wood, angled slightly inward. They were not there the day before. I ran my fingers over them. The cuts were clean, not splintered. They looked like something had dug in hard for grip. I took photos and notes, assuming wear or damage from before that I had missed. Still, it bothered me. The second day went as expected. I cleaned debris from the cabin roof, checked seals, and logged maintenance needs. The radio crackled with static, then went dead. No signal came back that afternoon. The sky stayed clear. No weather change. At sunset, the forest went quiet again. The timing was exact. I watched the light fade through the trees, counting minutes. As soon as the sun dipped past the ridge, the silence fell. My ears rang again. It felt physical, like pressure. The footsteps came later that night. Same pattern. Slow placement on the stairs. No sound of strain. I waited longer before looking this time. When I did, I saw movement again farther out. Tall, upright, passing behind trees without sound. It never stepped into open ground. It stayed just at the edge of visibility. I did not go outside. I stayed still and watched until it disappeared into darkness. In the morning, the gouges on the ladder were deeper. New ones overlapped the old. They lined up where hands would reach if someone climbed without using the side rails. I checked the ground. There were no clear footprints, just disturbed soil where boots could have been placed carefully. By the third day, the pattern was clear. Silence at sunset, movement at night, new damage by morning. I stopped telling myself it was coincidence. I stayed alert, logged everything, and kept my tools close. On the fourth night, I heard the steps stop halfway up the stairs. They stayed there for a long time. I did not look right away. When I finally did, I saw the same tall shape closer now, standing between two trees near the base of the stairs. It was not smooth because it was unnatural. It was smooth because it was controlled. Someone moving carefully, wearing dark clothing, staying in shadow. The realization shifted everything. This was not an animal. It was a person who did not want to be seen. Someone using the quiet to move, using the forest as cover. The gouges were from gloved hands digging into wood for grip, avoiding noise. The lack of creaking meant weight was being distributed carefully, tested before committing. The silence had an explanation too. Cold air dropped fast after sunset at that elevation, killing insect movement and flattening sound. What felt wrong was just unfamiliar. The next morning, I packed to leave early. Before I went, I checked the ladder one last time. Fresh marks cut deeper than the others. Whoever it was had climbed higher than before, close enough to test the structure, maybe to see if I was asleep or alone. I reported everything when I got back down. Days later, I learned there had been issues in the area with illegal tree harvesting and poaching. People used old lookout routes to move unseen, staying off trails, avoiding roads. The cabin sat on a known path between two valleys. Someone had been using it as a reference point, maybe watching for activity before moving through. The tall shape was a man wearing a pack frame that extended above his shoulders, blending his outline into the trees. The smooth movement came from experience, not something unnatural. The gouges were proof of repeated climbs, not one visit. The lookout was staffed differently after that. Motion sensors were added. I did not return. What stayed with me was not the image of the figure, but the silence. How easy it was for someone to move that close night after night without being seen, using nothing but patience, terrain, and the quiet that came with the sun going down. We rented the cabin because it was cheap and because the listing promised isolation. January 2019. Somewhere in Montana. The exact place is hard to pin down now since the listing vanished not long after, along with the owner profile. At the time, it felt like a good deal. The photos showed a small log cabin pushed into thick forest, snow piled high on the roof, smoke curling from a metal chimney. The description said quiet, remote, perfect for winter storms. We wanted a few days away from phones, work, noise. The price was low because of the season, because of the weather. We told ourselves that was all. The drive-in took longer than expected. The road narrowed after the last gas station. Plows had passed earlier that day, but fresh snow kept filling the tracks. Pines crowded close on both sides. The sky stayed gray, heavy and low, the kind that presses down on the land. When we reached the cabin, it was already late afternoon. Snow sat halfway up the windows. No other tire marks, no footprints, just our own tracks breaking the surface. The cabin smelled like old wood and cold iron. A small living room, a narrow kitchen, one bedroom, a bathroom with pipes that knocked even when no water ran. A stack of split logs leaned against the outside wall. The wind had started to rise by the time we unloaded the car. It moved through the trees with a long, steady sound, like breath forced through teeth. Snow began falling harder before night fully set in. Thick flakes, fast and slanted. The road disappeared in less than an hour. By dark, it felt like the cabin floated in a white void, cut off from everything else. We checked doors and windows out of habit. The front door locked fine. The windows latched, though the wood frames were swollen and stiff. The back door opened onto nothing but snow and trees. When we tried to lock it from the inside, the bolt slid but never caught. The metal plate was bent. The wood around it looked chewed up, old damage never fixed. We pushed the door closed again and stacked a chair under the handle. It did not feel solid, but it was all we had. The storm worsened after dinner. Wind slammed into the walls, rattled the chimney, shook snow loose from branches so it thudded against the roof. Around 11 p.m., the lights flickered once, twice, then went out for good. The heater shut off. Silence rushed in, broken only by wind and the low ticking of cooling metal. We lit candles and pulled blankets tighter. The cold crept in fast. The cabin made small sounds as it settled, wood popping, nails shifting. Every noise felt sharper without power, without the soft hum of electricity to smooth the edges. It was while looking for extra batteries that we found the Polaroids. They were in a drawer under the kitchen counter, pushed behind a bundle of old manuals and mismatched keys. The photos were loose, edges curled, colors faded but clear enough. People sat inside the cabin, on the couch, at the table, standing near the window. Each photo was taken from outside, pressed close to the glass. Reflections of trees and snow framed the faces. The dates written on the bottom stopped us cold. Some were years old. Others were from the same winter, weeks earlier. The same furniture, the same crooked lamp, the same knife marks on the table. The last photo showed the front door open, snow blowing in, the inside empty. The date was recent. We checked every window again. Snow covered the sills. No fresh prints showed, but the storm had erased everything by then. The wind filled any gap it found. The trees bent and swayed, branches scraping together with a dry sound. Time stretched. The cold deepened. The candles burned lower. It felt like the night would never end. Somewhere after midnight, the knocking started. It came from the side of the cabin where there was no porch. Slow, even, not loud, but firm enough to carry through the walls. Each knock spaced carefully, like someone counting between strikes. Snow muffled everything else, but not that. We froze. The sound repeated. No rushing, no pounding, just patience. We waited for it to stop. It did not. Minutes passed. The knocking moved once, slightly farther back, as if the person outside had shifted their stance. Snow slid off the roof in a heavy sheet, thumping the ground, but the knocking continued after. We did not open the door. We did not look out the windows again. We stayed where we were, lights low, breaths shallow. At some point, exhaustion took over. The knocking faded into the storm, or maybe it stopped. Cannot say when. Morning came gray and thick with snow. The storm had buried the cabin deeper. Drifts reached the bottom of the windows. The world felt sealed off. When we checked outside, we found tracks near the sidewall, half filled with fresh snow. Boot prints. Large, heavy tread. They circled the cabin once, then led toward the trees. The back door showed new marks around the handle with scraped raw. It had held barely. We dug out the car for hours, hands numb, faces stinging. The road was still blocked, but we drove anyway, pushing through drifts, following faint lines where the plow had been before. Took most of the day to reach a main road. We reported what we found once we had cell service again. Local authorities came out later that week. They found more photos hidden under floorboards. Not just Polaroids, digital prints too. Different seasons, different people, always taken from outside. They traced the property history and found the owner had managed several cabins under different names. He lived nearby, off-grid, watching renters, photographing them, entering cabins between stays. He had been using storms to trap people, to study routines, to test locks. The knocking was a check, a way to see if anyone would respond, if fear would make them slip. They arrested him months later after finding hard drives filled with images, dates, notes. He had never broken in while people were awake. He waited. He watched. He collected proof that he could. The cabin was taken off the rental sites. The listing disappeared. The place still exists, somewhere under snow and trees, empty now. Sometimes I think about how close we came to opening that door, how thin the wood was, how the storm covered everything. Cheap and isolated had felt like a bargain. It was just cover.